everyone and welcome back to my channel, Beth Chats Books. Now today's video is going to be the mid-year freak out book tag. So I'm not going to tag anybody in this because literally every booktuber has done this book tag in the last few weeks, and I'm going to get on the hype and do it before it becomes irrelevant. So this tag is usually out around this time every year as a way for booktubers to check in with their reading, what they've been reading and what they hope to achieve for the rest of the year. So I'll link the original tag down below and I will just crack on with this tag. So the very first question is the best book you've read so far in 2020. Now I might look down because I've written all the questions out just because I couldn't remember them off the top of my head, so you know what you're going to do. So the best book that I've read this year in 2020 so far, I have chosen Bridge of Clay by Marcus Zusak. Now this was a really pleasant surprise and I think that's why I've put it as my favourite book so far this year. So I ended up giving this 5 out of 5 stars. When I read this book, I didn't really expect to. To be honest, I probably thought it was going to be between a 3 and a 4 star. But it captivated me in a way that I really didn't expect, and I relinquished all expectation when I read this book, and it was a really pleasant reading experience and a surprise. So this is a very big book and it follows over an extensive period of time the Dunbar boys, which are 5 boys and Clay is one of them, in Australia, and it focuses on how these boys raise themselves. So their mother dies and their father leaves them, and they stay in the house and they raise themselves, and it's a really interesting look at male to male relationships and male sibling relationships and how males kind of deal with the terrain of emotions and relationships and communication when the male species finds it a little bit more difficult than the female species to communicate these feelings. So they're coming of age as well at this time, and it's a poignant look at their lives. It's quite slow and still and not a lot of action happens, so for a lot of people that will put them off, but for me this was a perfect mix of loads of different things. Clay is a really interesting character, and the way he sees the world and the relationships he forms. Running has a really big symbolism and significance in this book, which was really interesting, and this idea that running almost is a way in which people can physically but mentally run away from their problems, and it was just beautiful. It left me absolutely stunned, and I really think more people should read this, because for those who will like this story, I think they will really love this story, and I hope that more people get the pleasant surprise reading experience that I did from this book. And then the next is the best sequel you've read so far in 2020. Now the issue is I haven't read a single sequel in 2020 because I'm not a big series and sequel reader. I don't read a lot of different sets of books and series. So I've gone with a bit of a cheat. If I can find it. It's all the way over here. And that is Middle England by Jonathan Coe, which is technically number 3 in Jonathan Coe's series. So the very first book was Rotter's Club, and I forgot what the second book is, and The Closed Circle. But this is almost a standalone, so it's when these characters are in middle to late aging age. I don't really know how to describe that, but it's past middle age. These characters are 50s, bordering on 60s, so it's not, to me, middle age is maybe even more 40s. Anywho, with the way that people age now, I suppose maybe this is classed as middle age. But it deals with a group of characters that live in the UK, and it's post-Brexit, and it's going back in time to things like the 2012 Olympics and different events and how it shaped British identity, and immigration is also a big conversation in this novel as well. It is, again, a bit similar to The Bridge of Clay. It isn't jam-packed with loads of different things, but this is musing on a political moment in the UK and how the average person feels about that, what it means to be British, and how these people create a British identity or they feel disillusioned about a British identity. So there's a lot of really interesting things at play here. And as we're living in a big period of history in terms of when we look back with Brexit, with COVID, with the way that we treat immigration laws at the moment, with the Windrush scandal that came out a few years ago, we're in a really pivotal, important place politically in the UK, and to see the ground level experience of that was really interesting for me. So I actually really enjoyed this book, but yeah, I'm cheating a bit. It's not really a sequel, but there we go. And then the next book is new release you haven't read yet but want to. So I am picking The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. So everybody is talking about this book and I'm really excited to read it. So I know that it deals with a black British boy and it's a coming of age story and he's dealing with multiple different identities. I think it was Bow Ties and Books that mentioned this book, or it might have been Lauren Wade, I can't remember, but someone said in a recent video that I watched that it deals with loads of different identity struggles. So the individual comes out as gay and he's also black and he also has parts of his family that are Cypriot Greek, and so he's got multiple different identities, and then I think he goes to university, don't quote me on this, and learns about the drag culture and decides this is where he's meant to be, and he's learning about his identity through drag, and the Black Flamingo becomes his drag name. So it all sounds so interesting to me, and it really has had a lot of buzz recently, so it's something that I really want to get to. And then the next one is most anticipated release for the second half of the year. So this is a slight cheat again, because I believe this book is coming out in 2021, and that is Clara Under Sun by Kasu Ishiguro. Now I'm sorry if I say that wrong, I always pronounce his name wrong, it's a bit of a tongue twister for me to get my mouth around that name. But I believe this is going to be a really interesting discussion on the future of AI. So it gives me similar themes and feelings to Machines Like Me. I read the synopsis on the Waterstones website. So it's dealing with Clara is a robot and she works for a store and she wants to be picked. And it's all about the discussions around how AI is developing and how AI could develop to be superior to human intelligence. But then one of the stumbling blocks with AI in particular is how to train robots to really act and behave and be intuitive like human beings, how to create communications and connections between an AI robot and a human, how an AI robot can pick up on the change in somebody's emotion, how to teach somebody something, how to understand and be perceptive of human experience and emotion. Those are things that are definitely stumbling blocks with AI, and I believe, knowing how good Ishiguro is as an author, that he will go into those kind of discussions in depth. So I'm very much looking forward to reading that book when it comes out. And then the next one, number 5, is the biggest disappointment of this year. So let me find it. Is 3 Women by Lisa Taddeo. I really struggled with this book. I struggled to figure out why it was pitched as it was, a book about female desire, which for me it wasn't. I think this is a really interesting book in the light of the Normal People series coming out on BBC, because a lot of umbrage and issue that I took with the original Normal People book by Sally Rooney, I also revisited in this book, and that is the issue of female sexuality and how females and their sexuality is portrayed as really empowering if it's around the realms of S&M, and that it's so feminist to have that view and to be in control of your sex life, when a lot of depictions that I see of this kind of thing is really characters or individuals who are in pain, who are struggling, and people try and portray that as BDSM and S&M sex, that I think does a disservice to the BSM and S&M community. because it's not the same thing. A lot of characters in here have a broken relationship to their sexuality, and they are broken and they are in pain. So one of the characters has a relationship with her teacher when she's younger, and no one believes her, and he never gets any jail time for it. He's completely acquitted, and that trauma lives with her whole life. And there's another character in here who starts a weird relationship with her husband, where she sleeps with other people and records it or takes pictures of it and sends it back to her husband, or her husband actually watches her have sex with other people. And a lot of people say, oh, this is female sexuality, this is empowering, which is what this has been sold as, and that's what the publishers have kind of gone behind. And I personally see these women as having a lot of issues, and it's not healthy sex that is portrayed in this book, in my opinion. The character who's having these weird relationships, that she's sending images of her having sex with other men to her husband, has really bad eating disorder, has a lot of mental illness. The woman who's had a relationship with her teacher is completely traumatised by the experience, to the point where she's never had another relationship since because she can't trust anybody. There's a lady who falls in love with her childhood sweetheart, who's a complete arsehole, who exploits her, who takes the piss out of her, who makes her go and rendezvous in the middle of the woods with him, who doesn't acknowledge her, who doesn't see her as anything other than a means to an end, who doesn't respect her and doesn't give her dignity. And this is all portrayed as trying to be portrayed as a steamy fling between the two of them and reigniting old sparks, which for me, that is not what this book did. And I find it kind of sad, this book. This book made me really sad, because in some ways Lisa Taddeo has exploited their stories for this non-fiction, and these women really need help and to be understood, not judged, and also not to be uplifted, because it's not an uplifting experience. It seems for most of these characters it's traumatic, and sexuality and empowerment and liberation for women shouldn't be traumatic. This isn't healthy sex, and I think we need to acknowledge that and not to mislabel it. There, I'm off the soapbox now, there you go, there's that one. And then the next book is The Biggest Surprise. So, on a happier note, it's Robert McFarlane's Sunderland, because this was such a pleasant surprise. I mentioned a lot when I judged this for the non-fiction booktube prize 2020. It was in my quarterfinals judging, and I'm not big into nature writing. I really want to get more into it. So since lockdown, we've been really enjoying Spring Watch in the house, and it's been so exciting to find a new passion in the bits of nature that are on our doorsteps, to have a new appreciation. Spring and summer are my favourite months of the year because everything is light and bright and optimistic and hopeful, and even with COVID in the background, I love seeing flowers in bloom and being able to do my daily walk every day and see little bits of nature. And this also gave me that similar experience of just finding pleasure in nature. This is really exciting because it deals with the underland, so things below ground, and loads of exciting parts of nature that I just didn't know about. So there's obviously underground caving, things that I was aware of, but when there's the section about the underground city in Paris and about cave paintings and some really interesting things in here that I knew nothing about, it was so invigorating and compelling and exciting to read about. And it's just given me a new appreciation of the world around us, in particular the Epping Forest, where he goes with an expert of the Epping Forest and learns about how the fungi communicate with the trees on that ground level and underground. Just so exciting, and to know that complex and beautiful relationships are constantly forming in nature was just beautiful, and I loved every minute of reading this book. And then number 7, what is a new favourite author? So I am picking Dave Cullen. So I've only read Parkland actually, which is a bit of a cheat, but I have ordered Columbine. But I really enjoyed his writing style. I really like the topics that he discusses. So obviously he originally had his first book, Columbine, which dealt with the Columbine massacre, and then this is about Parkland, which obviously dealt with the Parkland shooting. And so he has by default become a bit of an expert on school shootings. And so obviously they're quite similar themes, but this book really took me by surprise. I loved his writing style. I loved how close he got to the people on the very front line of people who experienced it, who survived, the community rebuilding, and I loved that he was really with them. He was in on the experience in some ways. He wasn't physically there, but he got the closest to these kids that you're ever going to get get a book like this. And so I really enjoyed his writing, I really enjoyed his arguments, I really enjoyed where he took this book, and so much so that obviously I've ordered Columbine, which I want to read by the end of the year. And I'm looking, he's now an author that's on my radar. I want the book about the soldiers when that comes out, which I think is later on this year. I really want to get my mitts on that as well. So yeah, he's someone that I'm keeping a keen eye on now since reading this book. Then a newest fictional crush. So this is going to be a little bit strange, and I'm gonna go with Shin from The Night Tiger. Now I don't want to say too much because this is in my judging round for the semi-finals, for the fiction round of the BookTube Prize, so I can't really talk about it, but I found Shin a really compelling character. It's quite difficult because he has quite a complex / potentially romantic relationship with his stepsister. So for some people it might be a bit weird and it might be a very strange choice, but the way Shin's written in this novel, he's very fully formed. So you can see the adolescent cheekiness of him, but then you can see him develop into maturity. You can see his compassion and his love for Ji Lin in this novel. And he has some very admirable and attractive qualities, and he is written to seem quite muscular and protective and secure, yet loving and vulnerable character. I don't know, I just think he's pretty interesting, you know, so yeah, I'll pick him as my fictional crush for this year. And then the next is your newest fictional favourite character. Now I'm going to pick Cormoran Strike from the Robert Galbraith Cormoran Strike series, which has 4 books in it. A Cuckoo's Calling is the first one. Now that might be a bit controversial because I know that J.K. Rowling is getting some hate out there right now. And I'm a believer that whether you agree with an author, you can disentangle yourself from the author and their beliefs to appreciate their works, because I do believe that if I had to cull every single book on my bookshelf, every single book I've read since I've been a reader that had an author that had questionable morals, I probably wouldn't have very many books on my shelf. There's a lot of classics that I've loved and people rave about year after year. For example, Charles Dickens is an author who's written some fantastic characters in beautiful classic literature that we all appreciate, but it turns out he wasn't a very nice person and he was quite abusive to his wife. So there are a lot of authors that we make excuses for, and I'm not making excuses for what J.K. Rowling has said. I don't think it's come from a place of hate, personally. I think it's come from a place of a little bit of ignorance on how to start the conversation. And I don't think she's gone about it the best way, but her generation sees these issues in a different way. And I think the best way that we could deal with this is to try and help educate her instead of to alienate her. And her works, the Cormoran Strike books, are genius. He's a fantastically fully fleshed character. He is someone that you would meet at a local pub all over the country, not necessarily in London, in the UK. He is faulted, but he is lovable, and his relationship with Robin is just fantastic. They have the banter, but he's so protective and loving, and he's this lovable rogue, and he has so much depth and layers to him. I love that she has the disability representation with Cormoran Strike, because he loses his leg and he has a prosthetic, and throughout the different books we often have check-ins with Cormoran about his disability. He tells us when he's in pain, when his prosthetic is hurting him, when he needs a rest. So I think he is really well developed, and I do want people to carry on reading these books, and I do want people to carry on reading Harry Potter, because my main issue with alienating J.K. Rowling and her works is I find it really sad, because so many people have fallen in love with Harry Potter over the years, and it's taught and encouraged a whole generation of children, my generation included, to love reading and to engage with reading. And I think that's a beautiful thing, and I think that's something that we shouldn't discourage. And we also have to be careful about censoring books and telling people that they can't read certain books and that it's wrong to read certain books, because I feel that the censorship argument, I feel very saddened by the concept that people shouldn't. Things like Lady Chatterley's Lover has previously been banned, A Clockwork Orange, which has had so many readers love those books. So I'm against censorship of books. I think books shouldn't be the excessive and the ultimate and the only resource when we're discussing things. They are, in my opinion, a tool to start a conversation. Whether we find things problematic in them, we are ultimately always going to find problematic literature. But I don't think we should censor it. We should encourage the conversation. The more we read, the more we have umbrage with, let's discuss it. So I feel a bit sad about the whole thing at the moment, but I'm off the soapbox again. Sorry, I got back on it by accident. Right, the next question is books that made you cry. So I'm picking 10 minutes 38 seconds in This Strange World by Elif Shafak, and I'm picking this because the first half of the book deals with the last 10 minutes and 38 seconds of the character Tequila Layla's life. So Tequila Layla is a prostitute in Istanbul, and those last 10 minutes and 38 seconds, so the first half of the book, to me is incredibly powerful, because it goes through memories that she has of friends that she's met that are kind of outlaws like her. They are outcast for different reasons, and she is obviously outcast from society for being a prostitute, but it goes back through her early life, her family life, how she's ended up in the position she is. But what's terrible is we're going through these memories in her last 10 minutes 38 seconds of consciousness. She's discarded in a bin on the outskirts of the city, and nobody cares, and that was horrific. The idea that we all should believe in the sanctity of life, and to discard her like a piece of rubbish. And then at some point she's talking about her memories and someone comes and steals something off her. Some young boy steals some jewellery off her, and that was powerful for me, just how we can discard a person, their history, their life. And it made me think about so many things, so many deaths that we read about or we see on the news, and they just become a name. For example, George Floyd, the movement is powerful that's come off the back of George Floyd's death, but a lot of people have come before George Floyd, and they probably will after, unfortunately. But we use buzz names of people because they became something that was newsworthy, without knowing the history, the life, the family, community connections that belong to that person. And it's a really shitty thing in life that we do that, and we discard a whole person's narrative for the sake of a new narrative, which is who killed that person, or trying to justify their death because they were a prostitute, they were into drugs, I find that heartbreaking, and that was the most powerful part of that book for me, to realise that she was nothing because she was a prostitute, and her death didn't have any importance or significance or relevance. But then the second half of the book deals with all this community, all these friends and this relationship she had with these other people, and they cared for her. And it was just powerful, very powerful, made me sad. Okay, and then a book that made you happy. So I am picking Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo, and I'm picking it because it was so exciting to read this book and have this book all over the shelves in all the different bookshops, and for it to be buzzed about and for it to win the Man Book Prize, because more books should be on shelves like this one. It was refreshing. It was, warts and all, a depiction of all these different women, their sexuality, their race, their culture, their identity, but without there having to be a caveat to it, without there having to be an explanation, without having to be context or dumbed down for people. So one of the main characters, Amma, is really interesting because at the beginning of the book she has so many flings with all these different women, and her daughter is at her wit's end, and there's so many jokes between her and her friends. Oh, there's a new one. And I loved that because we never get a depiction of women who play around without them being a slut or unfaithful or deplorable in some way. And second of all, we never have an LGBT relationship depicted in novels where women have flings with other women and that's okay and they're happy about that and it's all consensual. It's always got to be either they're having a fling or they're experimenting for the purpose of a male. So it just felt refreshing that all these different sexualities and relationships to one another were explored in their naked and raw form, and there was no other alternative motive for writing it other than that's what it was. That's how these women are. And I found that really refreshing because when you actually go through bookshelves and bookshops, there aren't many books like this that is just refreshingly exactly what it says on the tin, and I really want to see more books like this. So because it's got all the hype, I'm hoping that we're going to write more narratives about LGBT plus relationships and about race and identity without always having to be a sexuality or an identity struggle. Why can't the identity or the sexuality just be there? And I know obviously we're still working for equality with all these different issues, but what was refreshing about this book is there wasn't an identity struggle. It talks about LGBT abusive relationships in here as well, and in its raw form. There was no, in the context of a straight relationship, to back it up. It was just as it was. I just find it so refreshing, and it just made me happy. So there we go. And then most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received. So I received from my auntie Ocean Vuong's On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, and I just think the cover is simply gorgeous. I love those leaves and the detail there, and it's very matted. It feels very soft and lovely, and it's just a simplistic cover, but I just think it's gorgeous. I just think it really, really works. So, and I like, it's got almost a pink, it's more pink looking at it here, but it looks almost peachy there to you guys, but it's a little bit more pink than that. But I just think the colour scheme is stunning. I just love this cover, so yeah, obviously. And then number 13, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? So I would like to read Girl with a Pearl Earring by Tracy Chevalier because it's been a long time coming. This has been on my list and radar for a while. Simon over at Savage Reads loves this book. I've talked about it before in my videos, so I'm not going to dwell on that. There's that one. The Secret History by Donna Tartt, because I seem to be the only one in the entire universe who hasn't read this book, so I want to get to it. Also, it's a lot chunkier than I expected. So it will be probably an epic romp, because a lot of people say how fast-paced this book is, but it is quite big, so... but yeah, I really want to get to this because everybody's raved about this book. So I'm not going to tell you that much about it, because you know about it. It's about, you know, students who study classics and they murdered a fellow student. We've all got to figure out why. And then I also want to read Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, because the series has come out on Hulu. I keep seeing everybody rave about it. It's got Reese Witherspoon in it, and I really want to read it before I get any spoilers from the series, really. So I want to get to it. It's about Shaker High. It's a really perfect suburban area in the US, and then these two families get intertwined and there's some secrets and things. So there's that. And then number 14, your favourite book community member. So I believe this is nominating a BookTube channel. So I'm going to pick The Bookish Realm. She's had a lot of subscriptions recently because a lot of people have now seen some really important videos that she's put up about the issue of Black Lives Matter and race identity. But she does fantastic videos. She does really good vlogs that are about 55 minutes long, which I love because I actually really enjoy a really long vlog, and I enjoy all the filler bits in a vlog just as much. I love somebody talking to me while they're driving in the car, or they nip to Barnes and Noble, or they are showing me what they're cooking in the morning. I love really long vlogs, which she does, and she has so much content. It's coming out of her ears. She's doing recommendations of books. She talks a lot about what it's like to be a librarian. She has lots of vlogs. Her little girl is gorgeous and she features her a lot in her videos as well. So if all of that sounds appealing to you, go and check her out, and I'll link her down below. So this has been my mid-year freak out book tag. So this has been lengthy, guys. I really didn't want to make it this lengthy, but what are you gonna do? So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with a brand new video. Bye now.